Hello and welcome to the Discover Dayton podcast, the show that's all about the Gem City's past, present, and future. I'm your host, Arch Grieve, and today I get to talk to Democratic candidate for Montgomery County Common Pleas Court Judge, Angelina Jackson. Jackson is currently a Montgomery County Public Defender and has worked in the past at the Ohio Justice and Policy Center and as an adjunct professor at the University of Cincinnati College of Law. My interview with her is up in just a moment. Hello and welcome to the show, and thanks so much for coming on to talk with me today.
Hey, Arch, thank you so much for having me this morning. I really appreciate it. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. Well, all right. So, obviously you're running for Montgomery County Common Pleas Judge, and we'll definitely get to, more into that in a minute. But to start, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your background and how you think it prepares you for the role and maybe why you're running.
Sure. As far as like my personal background, I was born and raised here in the city of Dayton. I grew up in the Fairview area, and I graduated from Dayton Public Schools, specifically from Colonel White High School. That was the performing arts high school before Stivers became the performing arts high school. After I graduated from high school, I left. I got my undergraduate degree at Florida A&M University. That's an HBCU in Tallahassee, Florida. And then I worked for a couple of years before I went to law school at the University of Cincinnati. So in terms of my legal background, I started my practice with the civil litigation division of the law firm of Dinsmore and Scholl. And there at that firm, I was handling a variety of civil matters that are the types of cases that are heard by the Common Pleas Court. And so we're talking about medical malpractice, contractual disputes, commercial disputes, just a variety of different civil cases. And so part of my background is in handling civil litigation. And additionally, I guess maybe I should have started where I am currently and work backwards. So let me maybe say it in a way that makes a little bit more sense. So I've been practicing law for just about 18 years now. So currently I'm an assistant Montgomery County Public Defender, and I've been here for 7 years. And in that capacity, I've been representing individuals who are charged with crimes, either in the municipal court, the Common Pleas Court, or the Court of Appeals, who cannot afford an attorney. And so presently I am the lead of our appellate division, but I have previously spent time in both the municipal and common pleas divisions as well.
Awesome.
So prior to coming to the public defender's office, again, like I had indicated previously, I worked at a law firm doing civil litigation, but I also worked at a nonprofit public interest law firm. It's the Ohio Justice and Policy Center. They are located in Cincinnati. And I was the director of the Race and Justice Project there. And in that role, we were litigating civil rights cases. We were handling criminal appeals, and also doing some policy advocacies surrounding, different areas of criminal justice reform. And so in terms of my professional background, it's been very diverse. And I have experience handling all of the types of matters that are heard by the Common Pleas Court.
Awesome. Well, and, to start off, you're obviously hoping to become the next Montgomery County Common Pleas Court judge, but even as a government teacher and former mediator, I'll freely admit that I don't always know what certain courts are responsible for. So could you maybe talk for a little bit about what you would be doing in that role if elected and what types of cases go through there?
Absolutely. So the Common Pleas Court hears felony criminal cases, and felonies are, so when I say criminal cases, what I mean are cases where an individual has been charged with a crime that is, and the case is being prosecuted by the state of Ohio. In the case of our felony criminal cases, misdemeanor cases can be prosecuted by the state or another municipality. But in the case of the common pleas court, they are hearing felony criminal cases, which are the cases that can result in a person serving a term of incarceration in a prison. And so the common pleas court hears felony criminal cases. It also hears civil cases where the amount in dispute exceeds $15,000. And then on a smaller level, there are certain types of administrative appeals that are handled in the Court of Common Pleas. And I think the split is, roughly half and half, with civil cases making up a little bit more. I think, a little over 50%, maybe. I think the last figure I looked at was probably about 53%. And then the felony criminal side would be 47%. And so those are the matters that the judges in the Court of Common Pleas are hearing. That's the structure of the court.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, now I know that you have some priorities that you'd like to work on if elected, including therapeutic alternatives to incarceration, using technology to increase efficiency and access to the court, and respecting the rights of victims. So can you talk more about each of those and what changes you'd like to implement?
So I can talk a little bit more about each of those. Right now, the court, like other common pleas courts throughout the state, has a number of what we call specialty dockets. And these are geared towards addressing some of the underlying issues that drive individuals into involvement with the criminal justice system. And so here in Montgomery County, we have a drug court, we have a women's therapeutic court, a mental health court, and a veterans court. And again, what these courts are designed to do is to help address the root cause with the goal of rehabilitating individuals and allowing them to come back out and be productive members of the community, and additionally reducing the chances that they will reoffend. And so given that a very, very large amount of cases heard by the common pleas court on the criminal side are being driven by these types of issues and other things, related to poverty, it's really important that we, find a way to address the root causes. And so I support the use of the specialty courts. Again, this is, an initiative that's kind of comes from the Ohio Supreme Court is basically kind of the ultimate authority on the structure and administration of these courts. But I support the ones that we are currently using. I support their expansion to the extent that that's possible. I know that there are courts in other jurisdictions that are kind of geared towards survivors of human trafficking and things of that nature. And so to the extent I am able, I would like to, be a part of looking for opportunities to expand the specialty dockets to areas maybe where we are not perhaps operating in. And so that is definitely a passion of mine because, what we see as public defenders, we are in a position to kind of see firsthand what is driving criminal behavior and what is working from a therapeutic standpoint, or, an intervention that's an alternative to incarceration. We're able to see what has been successful for our clients. And so I would be in a position to take that base of knowledge with me. So that's to the first point. Yes. And then on to the second point, which relates to access to the courts. You know, we've seen and we saw through COVID that we had to come up with an alternative way for people to meet their obligations. And so what grew out of that was an increased use of remote and virtual technology, where folks were able to appear in court. They didn't have to come in person.
Sure.
And so even though, the sort of the contours of the COVID-19 pandemic have changed, what the Ohio Supreme Court has done is they have adopted different procedural rules and encouraged courts to continue to make increased use of that option. And so I think this does a couple of things. It increases people's access to the court. It allows the court to operate in a more efficient manner. And that's really what it does. And so I am supportive of the use of that type of technology where it is legally appropriate. There are other considerations, particularly in criminal cases. We are in a position where the court needs to weigh the respective parties' constitutional rights, and weigh that against the goals that we seek to accomplish by using remote technology. And so judges are going to be in a position to make those decisions regularly. So one thing I do think is important is that, due to my professional experience and my work upholding the constitutional rights of people and analyzing those types of legal issues, I believe that I, have a nice, strong foundation to perform that type of analysis as it relates to, the type of constitutional rights that are being implicated by the use of that technology.
Sure. That makes sense. Well, so for full transparency's sake, a little while back, you and I both worked on Dayton's police reform process in the use of force committee led by now Mayor Mims and Representative Blackshear. You were a committee member and I was just a facilitator since I was working for the Mediation Center at the time, but it was a long and interesting process, I think. So I'm wondering if you could talk about it a bit, why you thought it was important to participate in it, and perhaps whether you think it went far enough in making needed changes to policing in Dayton.
Mm-hmm. So I was a member of the Use of Force Working Group, which was one of the original 5 working groups established by then Mayor Whaley. And in that process, as you know, that's the part you were a part of. That group consisted of community members and representatives from DPD and representatives from local government. And what we were doing primarily is looking at the policies and practices related to use of force. And we were making recommendations for how those policies and practices could potentially be modified. And so specifically in our group, as you know, I was part of, researching best practices as it relates to use of force, looking at the force policies from other jurisdictions, and then crafting recommendations for how our policy in Dayton could perhaps be changed to incorporate some of those practices. And the overall goal was to, look at provisions that would help to reduce the use of force while also keeping both residents and police officers safer. And that's really the true goal. And so as a result of that, we had several recommendations that were put forth for vote by the city commission. And many of those recommendations still remain outstanding, meaning that they have not yet been voted on by the city commission. I was part of the implementation committee, which was sort of the second phase after the working groups were concluded. But that was essentially to help oversee the implementation of recommendations that had already passed City Commission vote. And I now have been appointed most recently to the Use of Force Committee that is set up to continue to look at data and policies on an ongoing basis. And so I can't tell you as I sit here today what is going to happen to those recommendations. I think the work of the Force Committee, in order for us to be able to move forward, the work of the prior group would have to be concluded, i.e. having those recommendations voted on. I think, they're very solid recommendations that I think are supported by a number of, scholars in the field, and they are based upon existing policy in other jurisdictions and things that have been shown, to reduce the use of force and to reduce officer injury. And so I think that we came up with some very solid policy recommendations, and I'm hoping that they will ultimately be implemented at some point.
Awesome. Thank you. So my research tells me, and I could be wrong, but it appears that our next Supreme Court Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson, will actually be the first ever former public defender to serve on the Supreme Court. And I think the first since Thurgood Marshall to even have experience representing criminal defendants. And in addition to both being Black women with the last names of Jackson, you both have in common the experience of serving as public defenders. So could you talk a little bit about why you became a public defender in the first place, and then maybe how you see that experience impacting your role as a judge?
Yes. So interestingly, when, you asked me earlier about my background, the beginning of my work with indigent criminal defense actually started when I came out of law school and I was in private practice and working at a law firm. And they had a program where we took appointments from the Hamilton County Public Defender. And, that was back in, probably around 2005 is maybe when I started getting involved in that program. Mm-hmm. And the vast majority of the cases that I was handling were like felony drug possession cases, and they were predominantly cases involving crack cocaine. And I think to a young and kind of, I don't want to say naive because, I knew, but to see it up close and, be hand in hand with someone who was, facing the loss of liberty over those kind of charges, it was just very overwhelming because at that time, as everyone's well aware, we were treating addiction and possession far more punitively than we do now. And so as a young lawyer, I think it was very eye-opening and very tough experience. But, ultimately, I came to become a public defender after my private practice experience and after my, civil rights experience. It's because I wanted to bring my skills to basically help people who are a lot of times, they're either very, how should I put this? People suffering from poverty, people suffering from, marginalization, and just really in a tough set of circumstances. And a lot of times wanting to advocate, I wanted to advocate for the right outcome under those circumstances. And that involved, obviously both looking at what's appropriate within the bounds of the law, but, having an opportunity to humanize my clients before the court and, in most cases to advocate for a solution that would try and get to the root of what's going on. because a lot of times, and I think back to the panhandling cases that I got involved in when I first came to the public defender's office here in Montgomery County. We were, and this was not in the court of common pleas, this was in municipal court, but we were prosecuting and jailing large, numbers of homeless individuals under a law that was unconstitutional. And I was able to mount a successful challenge to that law. But the bigger picture issue was, what are we accomplishing by jailing people who are experiencing homelessness for a short period of time? If we aren't getting to the root of what is driving the homelessness and, the related criminal behavior, then what are we really doing?
Right.
That's the question. So I'm involved in this work, and for a lot of reasons. It's because I want to see the Constitution upheld. I want individuals who cannot afford an attorney to still have the type of representation that they are entitled to. And so that's what I try to do. I try to do a good job for my clients and to put them in a position to where when they come back out of the system, the goal is so that they don't come back in. We're not always successful, but I think in the vast majority of cases, that needs to be the goal.
Sure.
And so, yeah. And I want to bring that, I think, so I'm sorry, I rambled a bit.
No, you're good.
But I think, that perspective is really, really important, Arch. The bench is made up of attorneys with, at least currently, with, prosecutorial experience, with civil experience. And this is valuable. I don't think anyone would dispute that. But our profession is, very diverse, and public defenders and civil rights attorneys have very valuable professional experience that should be represented on the bench. Just because we are in that position of advocating for, the constitutional rights and other rights of individuals who are charged with crimes. And so I think that it's, in addition to some of the other things I mentioned earlier about, the root causes of crime and structural barriers, I think that we bring a very important perspective that should be represented on the bench. And that's what we're starting to see now, with the Biden administration, all of the appointments that he made to federal judgeships, and then obviously with Justice Jackson. It's really important. And at least that's the professional diversity component of it. And obviously we can also talk about, personal characteristics and, the racial diversity aspect of it, which is also extraordinarily important and relevant to what's going on here locally.
Sure. No, absolutely. Well, and so I guess shifting a little bit to the primaries, you're actually in a primary race at the moment against another Democratic candidate, Jacqueline Gaines. And then if you win this race, I believe you'd face off against the current judge who was appointed by Governor DeWine in the fall, which is Judge Robert Hainsman. So can you explain why you're the best choice out of all of those options?
So I just go back to number one, the fact that my professional experience is in handling the types of matters that are heard by the common pleas court. I have the civil experience. I have the criminal experience. In terms of my appellate experience, what you're doing as an appellate attorney is you are reviewing and analyzing the proceedings of the common pleas court, and you're looking at potential legal errors, and you are analyzing that. It's very heavy on legal analysis and research and writing, and all of these things are relevant to what a judge is doing on a day-to-day basis in the common pleas court. And so I think I have the type of diverse professional experience that would allow me to be comfortable with the substantive and procedural legal issues that are being handled by the court. But beyond that, again, I am the only candidate that has been a career public defender. I've been here for 7 years. I am the only candidate that has spent several years working at a civil rights law office. And I think that that's very important. I believe that perspective ought to be represented on the bench. And there are other things. I mean, we need women of color in the court of common pleas. We need, when we talk about diversity, we're talking about lots of different things, right? Mm-hmm. There are nuances to our personal characteristics. I'm a person that grew up here in the urban core of this community. I graduated from public schools. I attended a historically Black college. And I think that these things are important because, representation matters. And in the bigger picture, it's like this, when the community is looking to our local justice system and looking at judges, judges have to be representative of the people in the community that they're serving, because that's the only way that the community is going to have trust and confidence in the fact that the system is truly fair, is sure. When the people making decisions actually represent the people, okay, or are representative of the people. And so I think that, if people look into my background, I have a career that, reflects my belief and my commitment to human dignity, to, inclusivity and representation, and to the fair and equitable administration of justice. Because at the end of the day, that's really what I've tried to be committed to over these 17 years. All people are equal under the law. All people deserve to have a voice, and all people deserve to stand before a judge who is dedicated to applying the law in a fair and equitable manner. And that's what I will do if I'm elected.
Awesome. Thanks. Well, so obviously, as a former mediator, I've been involved with the court system somewhat in the past. So I know firsthand that many people are not familiar with mediation. So I'm wondering what role you think mediation should have, if any, in our judicial system in general and Montgomery County in particular.
So I think that, obviously on the in terms of the civil side of things, mediation is used regularly, and a lot of civil cases go through mediation, whether that's through the court sponsored mediation program, or if parties choose to mediate their disputes in another way. And so I think that's obviously fairly common in terms of civil cases. I know for you guys with the Dayton Mediation Center, I believe, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but you were being used primarily in lower level misdemeanor cases. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about mediation, though, I think it kind of leads me to think about this, is that, as a society as a whole, we should be looking for ways to resolve disputes outside of the formal criminal justice process. And we're doing some of that now. Obviously, diversion, intervention in lieu of conviction. And mediation doesn't really play a role in those types of things. But when we talk about, well, why are we supportive of mediation? It's because we are looking for a way for parties to resolve their disputes, on the civil side, or in the case of a criminal matter, for, a victim to be made whole in some way, and for there to be some accountability on the part of the offender, but to have this occur outside of the traditional criminal justice process, which is, arrest, prosecution, a conviction, and so on and so forth. So we're doing some of that now, and I support that in circumstances where it's legally appropriate. And I think as a community, we ought to be looking for ways to potentially expand that and open our mind in terms of our thinking on how we resolve these matters.
Awesome. Thank you. So one saying that you hear a lot in the United States is that we don't have a justice system, we have a legal system. And according to the ACLU, despite having just 5% of the world's population, we have 20% of the world's prisoners. So I'm curious how you interpret that data in relation to what happens to people right here in Dayton and Montgomery County, and how that influences your role as a judge, if at all.
So they're talking about two things when they talk about the legal system not being just. And one is the fact that, racial and ethnic and socioeconomic disparities exist at every stage of the criminal justice process for reasons, obviously, that are very complex. And what I'm talking about here, I'm talking about general data. I'm not talking about data specific to Montgomery County, but sure. I'm talking about the general criminal justice system. And I think that, that is a fact. Okay. It is not necessary, that's fact. And so I think that everyone who's involved in the criminal justice system should be prepared to acknowledge and accept that. I can say that I am. The role of a judge is to fairly and accurately apply the law. But I also think we need to remain cognizant of the fact that these types of disparities do exist and could be at play, and be mindful of that in our decision making. And so also, one of the things that I wanted to bring up that I think is a step that we're moving in the right direction, and what I would encourage us to do in Montgomery County in the Court of Common Pleas, the Ohio Supreme Court has set up the Ohio Sentencing Commission, a database to track felony sentencing, okay? Mm-hmm. Because 97% of felony cases are ending in a plea. I don't know if you knew that. That's an extraordinarily high number of cases. Yeah. And so through that process, obviously, the judges are dealing with pretrial motions and deciding evidentiary issues and other things before the case reaches its resolution. But sentencing is a huge component. And so what the Supreme Court has done is they've set up a database where we will be collecting all types of data related to felony sentencing. And the goal is to make this data accessible to the public and to make sentencing more transparent and more consistent throughout the state. And all common pleas courts have the opportunity to participate in the pilot program. I think we are not using it universally in every court, in every judge's courtroom, but I know that we're at least one judge here in Montgomery County is using that program. And so when what we have to do when we're talking about people's perceptions of the system and the things that are actually supported by data, we need to be looking for ways to fix those problems. And data collection is something that I support. I support the collection and analysis of data, because while it won't necessarily, maybe explain why things are happening in an individual case, it certainly would allow us to potentially see patterns and potentially be able to address disparities where they are occurring. And so I think that that's extraordinarily important. And then going on to the second point, which is, what you talked about with the percentages, is really what all types of scholars and just everyday folks and people are talking about over incarceration. And that relates directly to, using alternatives to that when it's appropriate. And so, yes, of course, I would like to be part of continuing to do that and support those initiatives.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. All right. So before I let you go, if people want to learn more about you, where can they go?
So they can go to our campaign website, which is www.angelinaforjudge.com. And they can also go to any one of our 3 social media platforms. We are on Facebook. It's Angelina Jackson for Judge. Instagram is the same. And then Twitter, Angelina for Judge.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today and coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
All right. You're very welcome. Thank you so much for having me. And I just want to, make sure you remind your listeners that despite some of the confusion that has been occurring over the drawing of the districts, that we still have a local primary on May 3rd, and early voting is open now. And so I just encourage everyone to get out and vote. And if folks have questions for me, please feel free to reach out and not hesitate.
Perfect. And thank you for that reminder. Thanks so much again.
Okay. Thank you, Arch. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. That was my interview with candidate Angelina Jackson, who's hoping to become the next Montgomery County Common Pleas Court judge. She will appear on the primary ballot in the upcoming May 3rd election, and I appreciate her taking the time to talk with me today. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to leave a review and share it with a friend. There's also Discover Dayton merch now on the website at discoverdaytonpodcast.com, so be sure to get yourself a mug or shirt or hoodie. Thanks for listening, everyone, and stay funky, Dayton.